So it's a bright, sunny Seattle day, and I'm really enjoying myself in the Seattle sunshine. I am planning a vacation, and all of a sudden I get a call from my brother, and from the other end of the line I hear, "She's gone, dude." And it takes me a second to figure out what my brother's talking about here, but he's talking about our mom. Our mom has passed away. And what he's calling me for, of course, is to inform me, but also to tell me, that mom wanted to be cremated, and she has an apartment that needs to be cleaned out, and who's gonna, division of labor, who's gonna do all this stuff. And so I hang up the phone with him, and I finish planning my vacation. Things are always really complicated between us. Flashback to a few years before that, and I think I'm probably 12 years old at this point, and I'm sitting on a tile floor in a Fred Meyer, and in this Fred Meyer, I'm playing with toys, and I'm testing the hip strength of action figures, and I'm singing to myself, and I'm humming, and all of a sudden I feel this presence come up behind me, and I feel this sharp pain in my arm, and it's where my mom has grabbed me so hard that later I would find out that she left nail marks in my arms. And she leans over and whispers into my ear, "Why are you drawing attention to us? When we get back into the car, I'm going to teach you a lesson." And this is sort of how it had always been with us. It had always been like this with us. I grew up absolutely terrified of her. She was my boogeyman, and still, I think to this day, probably the thing I've been most afraid of. And so after that point, I don't know what changed. I don't know what it was about this particular day, but she set something off in me. And so I look at her, lock her in a stare, and I say, "No, you're not going to touch me. I'm going to knock you down, and I'm going to set this store on fire down around you." And she looks at me, and I'm trying my best to maintain my composure. This is the first time I've ever said anything like this to her, and I'm just trying to maintain my composure. And she backs down, and she walks away, and she starts to, start mumbling about how she's going to go grab the security. And again, this is sort of like how this always was with us. She was going to go and grab an authority figure, and then they were going to scold me. She was always abusive, physically, mentally. She was super manipulative like this. And I knew just that it was going to be the same, that something had to change, though. And so I bolted. I ran away. And as soon as she turned her back, I ran outside, and I ran to the bike rack, and I grabbed the first bike that I saw that wasn't mine. Sorry to whoever I stole their bike that day. I grabbed the bike, and I pedaled home as fast as I could, and I beat her there, and I packed a bag full of my clothes and some food and a sleeping bag and whatever else I thought I would need. And at the age of 12, I lived on the streets for an entire summer. An entire summer. And so you'll understand, I hope, at least a little bit, why I finished planning my vacation when my brother called me. Things were always really complicated between us. But I sat on my feelings for a little bit, and eventually I canceled my vacation because it didn't feel right to go out and celebrate. Eventually, I decided I would take on the job of cleaning out her apartment. And so I find myself on my way to her apartment, and I find myself talking to the apartment manager, asking for the keys. And I haven't been there in a while to her apartment. I don't really know what to expect. We talk on just a very loose basis to one another. I'll call her every once in a while. Maybe I'll show up once a year just to wish her a happy Thanksgiving because she spends holidays alone. And so, I just don't know what to expect when I walk in the front door, and I'm kind of horrified before I can even get in the front door because I can barely open the door. It turns out that she has, in the last few days of her life, or last few weeks or months, has begun hoarding things, and there is just a horrifying amount of stuff. There's just newspapers stacked on top of newspapers, and for some reason, couches stacked on top of love sofas, and there are documents dating back to the 70s and 80s, and there are like a graveyard of junk parts from computers, and there is just stuff freaking everywhere. And I'm a little bit furious, I'm going to be honest, to see all of this stuff. This is like a last parting gift for something that I didn't even want to do in the first place. And the only space to work in this environment are these little narrow pathways that sort of lead from room to room, and I'm sure she just like had to carve them out of all of the stuff. So I'm moving around from room to room, and I finally find a wide open space to work. And it's a bare patch of carpet on the floor. And I mean, it's literally bare. Like, this is the spot where the coroner had to carve out the carpet in a rectangle around her body to take it away so that they could do a full examination. And it is literally the only spot that I have to do like any amount of work, any good thinking, any good sorting. And I guess my pyromanic tendencies came back, and I was like, at a certain point, I was just like, screw it, I just want to burn this place down and be done with it. Like, that's what I want to do. But I stick with it, and I end up sorting through just all of her stuff, and I begin to find some things that really like put her life into perspective for me. I find really bizarre things, like all this correspondence between my biological father and her deciding whether to have an abortion for me or not. By the way, don't hang on to those letters for any of you that are thinking about it. I didn't want to see them, and I regret to this day seeing them. I also found just like all these really like bizarre, they were like part poetry, part like prayer to God, like for forgiveness and to be a better person and to reconnect with family and all these kinds of things. And all this stuff is it's really kind of like weighing very heavy on my heart, and I really don't want to do it anymore. But then I start to find these gold nuggets lying around. I start to find stuff that I didn't know about my own childhood. For example, I find out that my brother, the one who called me earlier, he was at one point a baby pageant participant, and he won second place. And of course, I had to text him a picture of that, and so he was like, "Dude, you have to hang on to that." And I was telling him, this is awful. I do not want to do this. But he was like, "No, man, I'm sorry, but you gotta hang in there and get through this. Like, I want more awards. I want more baby pageant awards." And so I'm sorting through all this stuff, and I'm beginning to find more and more things that made me glad that I stayed. I'm beginning to find love notes to my mom from me for Valentine's Day that were like, "Mommy, I love you, and you're the best mom, and thank you." And and I'm beginning to find mental health records that totally contextualize her life to me as an adult, and I'm beginning to see all of these things that for the first time in my life make me see her as a person and not as the boogeyman. Make me see her as someone that was really just struggling and maybe couldn't have raised me properly, but was really just struggling and doing her best. And what really sealed the deal with this, what really made me think that she was just a struggling person was this note that I found, and I actually happen to have a transcript of it here. The note said, "I'm so sad. I'm no good. I'm so alone. I wish I were dead." And it was this note, I think, more than anything, that made me see her just as a human, that made me see her as something not to be feared, as something that just happened, and it made me see her as someone that just needed more help than she got. And it was there, sorting through all of that stuff on that bare patch of floor in the place where my mom had died, and that's where I found home again. Thank you. I ended up, I don't think I mentioned this, I ended up in the foster care system after my stint of homelessness, and I just spent the rest of my childhood years, 12 and on, in foster care, and then I aged out of foster care at the age of 18. For those of you that don't know, aging out is just a fancy way of saying that you leave foster care without a connection, a permanent connection to an adult, basically. So that should cue you in as to my work, which is I have been doing foster care policy work since aging out. And I started by doing an internship, and then I did another internship, and then I just kept doing all of the internships until eventually I had a job I was unqualified for. I built a policy program at an organization called Foster Club, and have been doing advocacy work in DC for youth in foster care, homeless youth, LGBTQ youth ever since.
Go ahead. Timothy, we were talking earlier, and you mentioned that you'd just been in Japan. What took you to Japan?
So I do all of the things. Not only am I involved in with Foster Club, which is the National Network for Youth in Foster Care, I'm also involved in another organization which is Seattle-based. It's called the International Foster Care Alliance, and I do sort of systems change work also with that organization, but we have a more global focus, and right now we're taking a super deep dive in Japan, which has a child welfare system that is about 90% group home based. It was a system designed after World War II and has changed very little since, and has garnered the attention of organizations as prestigious as the United Nations, and has drawn their ire. And so we're working in partnership with some folks in Japan to get them more family-based foster care, similar to the United States foster care system. I've been really focused on doing policy work and specifically empowering constituents of a particular community to use their stories to speak truth to power, so to speak, to talk to policymakers about needed changes to mostly the foster care system is what I've been working in. And so I've been working with young people for years to make very concrete points about their stories. So you have like a 2-minute, almost like just like an extended elevator speech, and at the end you make an ask. But with the Moth, it was like there was no ask attached to it, you know. And so as a result, my very first storytelling was about 20-25 minutes. This story that you heard, I included all of the details, necessary or not, and without the direction, without knowing who I have one member of Congress that I'm talking to that's on this committee, and they have this power to do that. Like, without that direction, I was just totally lost and all over the place. And so this made me feel new again, and in terms of storytelling, and I really appreciated that.